I'm Mark Price. I'd like to talk to you today about life's choices. But first, there was a young girl sitting on her grandfather's lap, and she was really studying his face and noticing how wrinkled it was and how many spots there were on his face and on his hands, his arms. And she said, "Grandpa, were you made by God?" And Grandpa looked at her and said, "Well, yes, I was, but many, many years ago." And then she looked at her grandfather and she said, "Grandpa, was I made by God?" And Grandpa looked at her, smiled, and said, "Oh, yes, God made you in love, but much more recently." Little girl looked up and said, "God's getting a lot better, isn't he?" Well, life's choices, the choices we make in life and why we make those choices. Today's readings, the fifth Sunday of Ordinary Time, we have as our first reading from the book of Job. Now, the book of Job is a great book. It's a wonderful story. They say it's one of the oldest stories ever written, many millennia ago, and it was written to try to help us to understand this pull between good and bad, right and wrong, why things happen, how we should respond when they happen. At this point in the book of Job, our reading today talks about a very low point, when Job is just down and out. Woe is me. Everything is bad. Everything is rotten. I've lost everything. It's horrible. I can't wait to go to bed because my day is drudgery and pain and suffering. Woe is me, he keeps saying. And he is feeling very, very down. Now, if you read the entire story of Job, you realize that he makes a turnaround. He gets all of his things back, everything he lost, his family, his life's possessions, his land, his cattle, his everything he lost, he gets back and more. But you have to read the rest of it, and then you have to understand, why did that happen? Why was he so down, and what changed in his life? What changed was he made different choices. Instead of looking at himself and feeling down and out, he decided to choose God, to trust God, and that made the difference in his life. In the second reading today from St. Paul in his letter to the Corinthians, we hear St. Paul saying how he is out preaching, and he doesn't boast about preaching. He says, "Woe if I don't preach." So Job is saying, "Woe is me," because everything bad is happening. And Paul is saying, "Woe if I don't do the will of God, because God has given me this wonderful honor, allowing me to spread his word to others." Now, St. Paul had a transition in his life, a change in his life, a metamorphosis in his life. He started out as somebody who persecuted the Christian people, the followers of Jesus. He was a person responsible for the deaths of Christians, followers of Jesus. And yet, because of that road to Damascus experience, that change, that metamorphosis that he had, that conversion, if you will, he made a different choice. And he chose to follow God, to make God primary in his life. You see, it's in the choices that we make that change our life. It changes us from being down and out or from doing the wrong thing to all of a sudden feeling better about ourselves and feeling that we are on the right track. And that's what we saw from the first two readings today. Now, in the gospel, we hear the story from the Gospel of Mark of Jesus, after preaching in the synagogue, goes to the home of Simon Peter and learns that Simon's mother-in-law is ill, and he goes and he heals the mother-in-law. Now, it's interesting because in the Gospels, it never mentions Peter's wife. But we know he has a wife. Why? Because he has a mother-in-law. And I've learned you don't get one without the other. So Simon Peter is at the mother-in-law's house. He's told that she is ill, and he goes and he heals her. And it's interesting that it says that when he touched her, he prayed, and immediately she was better. Now, anyone who has ever been suffering from a bad fever, you know that when the fever breaks, You don't just immediately feel great. You're still down and out. You're tired. You're worn out. Your body needs a little bit of time to be rejuvenated. But the healing that comes from God, the healing that comes from Jesus was immediate. It says she immediately got up and served them. So in the first two readings, we hear about people who made choices and how it changed their lives. And in the gospel, we learn about how to make the right choices, where to find within us the strength to make the right choices in our life. Jesus gives us 3 ways to live our life so that we are on the track to making the right choices in what we do and how we live. First, as he did with Peter's mother-in-law, we are to serve others, to help others, to meet the needs of others. When we focus on others, we have less time to focus on ourselves and our shortcomings and our problems. So the first step from Jesus is to focus on others, to help others. The second, we learn from the gospel today that Jesus rose early in the morning to go out and pray. So the second thing we need to do in our life, first is help others, serve others. The second is to pray, to connect with God, to connect with the source that created us, to go and rejuvenate our batteries, if you will, and really get ourselves focused on what the day is all about, to pray to God, to talk to God. I'm a follower, a believer in, a fan of Fulton Sheen, who's now, as you may know, being considered for sainthood. And Fulton Sheen said that we are to pray an hour a day. One other saint used to say you're to pray a half hour a day, unless you're having a bad day, and then pray an hour. But Fulton Sheen said pray an hour a day. And I've been trying to do that since I'm about 11 years of age. And I've learned that just as Jesus did in today's gospel, that if I make it my priority, I do it first thing in the morning before anything else, then I make sure I get it in, I talk to God, and I find that my day goes much more smoothly. So the first thing we have to do to make the right choices in life is to make ourselves available to help other people. Second is to pray on a regular basis, a daily basis, and make prayer with God a priority. And the third thing, and we learned this from Paul, from St. Paul in the second reading, and we see with Jesus, is that once we are focused, once we have been helping other people around us, then the next thing we do is we take those gifts, those talents that we have, and we go spread it to anyone who will listen. We go and help others with who we are, with what God made us to be. You see, if we can be nothing else in this world, we can be a good example. So the third step is to take those gifts, those talents we have, that we are blessed to have, and go out into the world and share it with other people. We do those 3 things: help other people, pray regularly, and then share our gifts with others. That will help us get on the track to make the right choices in our life, to be like Job and go from being a person who is focused on all the problems to someone who chooses God, trusts God, and all of those problems seem to dissipate, seem to go away. Let us be like Paul in the second reading and go out because we are blessed to be called by God, to be given the gifts, and we want to share them with each other. So the message today is there are choices in our life. Let's make the right choices. Amen? This is Mark Price. Thanks for listening.